Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment, and today we are going to find out if I just spent a fortune on a fake bottle of Petrus. Now, I have never tasted Petrus in my life. I do not have ultra-rich family members or friends, and even those who are doing well certainly don't see any logical reason to invest in such a pricey bottle of wine. And I truly understand them. If I did not have my little YouTube channel No Sediment, where we talk all things wine, I might not be half as tempted to find and open this famous bottle of wine. So what happened? Because Pomerol, now one of the most prestigious appellations in Bordeaux, used to be seen as nothing more than simply a satellite of Saint-Emilion. And before Pomerol even earned its fame and glory, it seems that Petrus was at least in part responsible for putting it on the map. More importantly, the fame and uncompromising quality of its wines are closely linked with the devotion of Madame Lubot, the woman who saw the potential of Petrus and introduced it to the entire world. And it has brought us to where we are today, where even the top wine experts who focus on Bordeaux and on whom Bordeaux's fame partially relies admit that they haven't tasted Petrus extensively. You can even see it in their reports. There are far fewer tasting notes on Petrus than from any other estate. So for a while now, I have been looking for ways to acquire a bottle of Petrus without it wiping out my bank accounts and savings, and hopefully without me having to sell any real estate I own. So safe to say, I was looking more into secondary market, for example, restaurants that somehow ended up with bottle or two and did not know how to sell them. Of course, it meant that provenance was not guaranteed, nor did I have any proof of how these bottles have been stored. I almost got lucky. One restaurant wanted to sell a few bottles of Petrus that they had bought, according to themselves, purely to show off. They absolutely did not have clientele like that would feel comfortable buying a bottle like that. But after hearing how very little I was willing to offer, they decided it looked way better sitting on the shelf as a trophy. At the time, I was fine with that, but saying it now, it makes me feel slightly sad. I wonder how many genuine bottles have ended their lives as bookends on display shelves, bought to impress, but never a good enough time to be opened and enjoyed. And how many fake bottles have been drunk with hashtag after hashtag posted on Instagram. Anyhow, I started asking around, and not long after, a friend of mine sent me two photos of two different bottles, one from the 1961 vintage and the other 1953. They were offered to him from a private seller in Germany, and they came with an amazing prices. 1961, one of the greatest vintages of all time, usually goes for somewhere between 8,000 to 10,000 euros on the market. This guy was selling it just little over 1,000 euros. Wow, what a treat. And the 1953 vintage with a perfect label was just slightly more than that. But when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. With short inspection, I saw that the 1953 label was way too well preserved for its age. And why the damn hell did it say anything about Premier Grand Cru Classé when we all know that Pomerol has no classification? I also noticed that the vintage had slipped all the way down to the bottom right corner, and after a quick check of real Petrus labels, I realized that it was never meant to be there. The 1961 was harder to dissect because the label was more damaged, and the vintage was exactly where it usually is, at the top center, just in a different font. Anyway, my answer was hard no. As I continued my search, I found two bottles from the 1986 vintage. They were still in Bordeaux, part of someone's private collection, and I thought the offer was interesting to explore. Both wines were supposed to be from 1986, albeit only one label survived to prove it. When I asked the seller if I could be sure about the vintage, I received a very fun French-style answer, and it said, if I wanted to fake it, I would have said that it is vintage 1989 or 1990. These are genuine wines from a private collection. Got it. Convinced me. Why didn't I choose the other bottle, the one where the vintage was still visible on the label? Simply because its cork and capsule were in much worse condition, and if I am paying that much for a bottle of wine, I'd rather have a poor label than a poor wine. Now that I have the bottle with me, there are few things we ought to inspect, because like I said, provenance is not guaranteed when buying wine in the secondary market. So the first thing which I really enjoyed was how really detailed the grapes are on the label. And you actually see the St. Peter on the label here holding the key to the gates of heaven. We'll see whether or not I feel like I'm in heaven when tasting this really rare bottle. Another thing that I was happy to see, that the capsule looks genuine, it's a genuine color, and it has the mise en bottle Au Chateau on the label. And another thing that I thought was a good sign of this to be a genuine bottle is that at the bottom we have Petrus engraved. That leaves us with nothing more than to open the bottle and inspect the cork. But before we do, this is almost 40 years old bottle. And I would want to say that ouillage here is really good. If this is a real bottle, it has been kept in good conditions. All right, so let's. All right, so I have extracted the cork and I used this fork or needle. I always use it for older bottles because it is very easy to break the cork, especially if it is as moist as this one, and the wine has penetrated almost all the way through. You can see it. So the cork is crumbly and you can break it very easily. So with this kind of corkscrew, which is very reliable and definitely one of the best friends for many sommeliers, it can still be very aggressive to older corks. And the cork that we extracted, so indeed it is 1986. It says so on the cork itself. So we do have that. It says Petrus, it says Pomerol, and it says that the wine has been bottled at this state. So the cork also seems genuine. And to be honest, I will be pouring now the wine to taste it, but I don't have the experience. I cannot compare it with other Petrus wines. I cannot compare it with other Petrus of 1986. One thing before we do taste it is 39-year-old wine. It is almost 40 years old bottle, and not a lot of wines can age as long. So there is still a risk that the wine will be gone, that the wine will be faulty. 1986 was not the perfect vintage. For some, it was struggling. It was definitely not the greatest vintage in Pomerol. So we will see. But I quickly sniffed the cork. And I understand you're not really supposed to sniff the cork because what really matters is the wine that you pour in the glass and how elastic it is, and it is really high quality cork. It is really elastic, that's true, but it smells good. It does not smell of TCA, so that's nice. But let's pour the wine and see what is what. I poured myself a lot. All right, the one thing that would caught my attention if the wine would have been fake would be the color. If it would be really deep, ruby, intense, maybe bluish or violet, I would know for sure that this is not 1986 vintage, but it is youngish color for a 40-year-old wine, I will say you this, but it still is garnet. It does have some of that orangey hint at the rim, and it is still alive. Now give me some time to actually converse with the wine. I am slightly excited, but also, you know, I'm a bit afraid because this is my very first sip of Petrus. So all right, so on the nose, I do not feel much of the fruit. There is a lot of earthiness and some herbal hints to it. There is maybe some damp earth and some mushroomy or forest floor aromas, but I don't feel much of the fruit. And it is so interesting because not long ago I made a video on Merlot and we talked about how Merlot is this really fruit-driven grape variety. And in this case, this is more earthy, more savory type of wine. Of course, it has aged, so it is only natural. All right, so let's taste it. What is interesting is that this wine is only 12.5% of alcohol, which is unique for Merlot, which is grape variety that develops quite high alcohol content. And I read that actually at that time, Petrus would harvest their grapes earlier rather than later. So maybe this is why on the palate for this wine, I do feel higher acidity. I do feel slimmer body. The tannin is quite beautifully polymerized. It is not astringent or rough, but unfortunately, this wine does not have a lot of fruit on the palate as well. So maybe, you know, with higher ripeness of the fruit, this wine would have a bit more mid-palate because this is something that I was missing here in this wine. Let's taste it again. I will say that the second sip was nicer. I liked it better. And I somehow, for a second there, I thought it had that Pinot Noir quality, like, you know, lighter in style, lighter bodied. I would really expect for this wine to be big and full-boned and highly structured, but this one is more acidity-driven, and the tannin is really beautiful. But that earthy, that savory, that maybe slightly balsamic nuttiness on the palate, it is something that lingers. It is something that creates the aftertaste, creates or shapes the finish in this wine. To be honest, I don't feel discouraged to try other vintages. I would really love to try some younger vintages and see how this wine is shaping right now. I don't feel though that more than 1,000 euros for this bottle is worth what it is delivering in the bottle. Completely honestly. I can name hundreds, not hundreds of bottles that cost way below and that would bring way more pleasure for me personally. But it is an experience. It is a legendary bottle. I do think this is genuine bottle. I don't think I have paid for something that is not real, but maybe it needs also some time to open, you know? I never decant my wines. I like them to linger in the glass and I like to spend a whole conversation, a whole evening with my wines. Sometimes they die faster and sometimes they open up in the glass and then you can follow its development in its moment. So maybe recording a short format video for a bottle of Petrus for YouTube is not giving it justice. Anyhow, I will come back to you because I promised to you at this very moment, I feel like I'm going to finish this bottle with some friends and family. So I will be now the rich family member who shares this wine with everyone around me. And I will let you know if it happened to open up a bit more. But for this very moment, I will give this wine 90 points. Thank you guys for watching this video. I would have never seeked out and opened this bottle if it wasn't for you and for No Sediment YouTube channel. So If you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing. It does mean a lot. It allows me to open all these beautiful bottles and share the stories about them with you. And let me know in the comment section below if you have ever been part of such an amazing tasting, like tasting Petrus, or have you ever caught a fake bottle of Petrus or any fake bottle for that matter? Share your experience and make sure to watch this video next.